Our biggest problem in the MSP industry today is lack of. Well, I'm Arlin Sorensen. I ran an MSP for 27 years. So now I work for ConnectWise as a VP of Ecosystem Evangelism. A lot of MSPs get stuck at about $1 million. It's because they haven't really embraced sales. The embracing of sales, it really is a mindset that most MSPs have to work their way through. Profit is not a bad thing. It's why people run businesses. A lot of MSPs feel guilty. I'm taking money from my customer. Yes, you are, but you're delivering value to your customer. And that's what you have to focus on, is what's the value that you're delivering. Accountability. We can find excuses every day for how we waste our time. That's where I really learned the power. Go to the doctor. Most owners that I talk to, they don't have time. Medical professionals are there for a reason, and we need to leverage them. You're no good to anybody if you're not taking care of yourself. The statement I hear over and over, and I made it, I'm sure 1,000 times, well, I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it for the family. Giving up this birthday party or going to that baseball game because the customer's got an issue, but I'm doing it for you. The reality is we're doing it for ourselves. We have to learn to say no to things. As owners, our mindset is, well, we're going to say yes to everything. Every opportunity is a great opportunity. It's not.
Arlin, welcome to the MSP Insider. Please, it's the same thing I ask everyone when I open it up, but I almost feel like I don't have to with you, but I'm going to do it anyway. Please tell the audience who you are, what you do, and why the hell it is that you do it.
Well, I'm Arlin Sorensen. I'm a simple Iowa farm boy that grew up in southwest Iowa and started a farming operation with my family. Fell in love with technology in 1982 when I got an Apple II Plus computer, and that started me down the technology path. I ran an MSP for 27 years and loved to deliver technology solutions to customers, and started a peer group organization along that journey, and sold that to ConnectWise back in 2018. So now I work for ConnectWise as a VP of Ecosystem Evangelism, which I translate into helping partners be successful. So that's what I love to do. I love to learn about partners and how they're doing and where their struggles are, and share my experiences from the School of Hard Knocks, which is where I learned most of my lessons, and try to help them get to where they want to go.
Yeah. Man, almost the way you finished that sentence too, I know we're going to unpack quite a bit, because there's so much power in knowing where you want to go. And it's really easy in the line of work that we do as MSPs to get so caught up into every single other aspect of this accidental business and accidental reality that so many of us create, that we don't slow down enough to really dig deeply into to really understand that part. And so we'll almost kind of reverse engineer that through our conversation today. But before we do, I am breaking protocol a bit again, twice in a row right away, but that's fine. Generally, we'll open the show with a question that's left behind by a previous guest. But the real one burning question that I had, which is the one I'm going to open it with you, is if you had to distill your life down to just one lesson, something that your grandkids could live by, what would that be?
That life is all about people, not jobs, not things that you can put on your resume. The world is full of people, and we're all unique and different, and that's what really matters. We got to learn how to make money. We got to learn how to use our time wisely. But at the end of the day, it's about how we interact and invest in the people around us. That's where my success has come from, is not because I'm the smartest knife in the drawer. It's because I surrounded myself with people that were smarter than me and could do things much better than me. And we built teams of folks that just executed. So life's about people and relationships. And if you invest there, things are going to go well.
Yeah. What was the moment where that truly anchored in or set in? Like, where was that? I can't go back from seeing this to be true.
We had a good run into the late 90s, and we got stuck. We plateaued in the 90s, and I had been, the sole salesperson basically, and thinking that I could just keep carrying the company and pushing forward. And we hit the $4 million plateau.
Mm-hmm.
We got stuck there for 5 years in a row, and I was frustrated that we couldn't break through.
Mm-hmm.
And being in rural Iowa, there's not a lot of customers. We don't have
Yeah,
hundreds of them outside our doorstep.
sure.
So, I blamed that as the issue. But the reality was I wasn't really leveraging the resources that I had on my team. I
Mm-hmm.
was holding on to control. And it wasn't until I really figured out that, hey, these other folks are smarter and better than me, and just get out of the way and let them
Mm-hmm.
do their jobs.
Yeah.
And we broke through that and took off from there.
That hits so hard because I experienced a lot of that in different MSPs that I work for, different leaders, different structures, all that sort of thing. And yet it does feel like that moment is one of those moments that is the difference in the arc for any MSP. And it might be the same for any business. It's just that MSP is all I know. Maybe speak to the MSPs that haven't quite grasped that yet, but they're on the before side of that moment, just like you. They're up against whatever ceiling they're at, whatever the number is, and they haven't had that aha moment, but they do desire to go past it. What would Arlen sit down and say as more of a heart to heart with that individual to help turn that light bulb on?
Yeah, well, I think first you have to realize that running an MSP, and I think any business, is a series of plateaus.
Hmm.
There are just things you're going to have to overcome and break through, and curve jump is what I call it. Jump from
Yeah.
current curve to the next curve, which requires change, and it typically requires getting other people involved to help you work through that change.
Yeah.
I see it a lot of MSPs get stuck at about $1 million or a little less than
Hmm.
$1 million, and it's because they haven't really embraced sales.
Yeah.
And it's the embracing of sales that really is a mindset that most MSPs have to work their way through. They're
Hmm.
great at fixing anything that doesn't work, but when it comes to sitting down and really having a sales conversation, they're uncomfortable with it. They don't
Yeah.
they don't like sales. They don't
Right.
embrace it. They're technical
Hmm.
minded folks. And so, once you recognize it, number one, and then embrace the fact you've got to make a change, and oftentimes you have to involve other people to help you make that change because it's not in your DNA.
Hmm.
You can start to work your way up those different plateaus and continue to grow. But if you don't make those changes, you're just going to be stuck there forever. And unfortunately, there's a lot of MSPs in our industry that are stuck, and
Yeah.
they're unwilling to make those changes. They have to if they want to continue to grow.
Yeah. Is there a 3-step framework? And I know it's more than three, but if you had to kind of break down that transition, because I kind of heard two things. And again, I've experienced that myself, where the awareness or the desire or the ability to let go of the control and truly shifting your mindset to a sales and marketing, like growth first company ideology, not like the tech doer ideology. Are there elements of a process that we can offer to that MSP owner that's listening that will help them begin to traverse that chasm?
Yeah, it starts with really recognizing that there is a plateau that you're facing,
Hmm.
and then a willingness to do what you don't want to do, which is
Yeah.
embrace sales methodology.
Hmm.
You know that mindset is really the big blocker
Hmm.
that many MSPs never work their way through.
Yeah.
Um, but you've got to embrace the fact that owner-led sales is going to be your model at least until you're $4 to $5 million. But I see that even getting to where it works up to the $7.5 million MSP.
Hmm.
And so many MSPs want to get rid of the sales motion completely and throw it
Yeah.
over the fence to some poor person they hire. They don't have the marketing support. They don't have any processes. They don't have any lead gen, and
Hmm.
they hire this poor salesperson, believing that they can throw it over the fence and somehow magically they're going to be able to step in and sell things, and find out 90 days later that they haven't sold anything, and they fire them and they hire the next one, and it just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
You have to embrace owner-led sales if you want to break through, and that means you got to learn, and because it's not native to most MSPs, and so you've got to accept it. You've got to embrace owner sales. You've got to get educated and learn from your peers.
Mm.
Leverage peer groups to help you understand how to sell.
Yeah.
Because you'll always be the best salesperson in your company, even if you don't like it, because you don't
Mm-hmm.
have the limitations that you're going to put on your salespeople.
Yeah.
And owners are able to go out there and just make things up as they interact with the customer and create the SKU on the fly. Basically,
Mm-hmm.
they don't give their salespeople that kind of luxury. It's
Right.
here's what we sell, here's how you sell it, and then we wonder why they don't succeed when we can go out and do it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been my big learning is you have to accept the fact that it's a unicorn if you can go out and hire a salesperson at a small size company and have
Mm-hmm.
them succeed, because they just don't have the support they need. They don't have the management they need. I mean, that's the other fallacy about sales is a good salesperson will manage themselves and do the things they're supposed to do all by themselves.
Yeah.
That's good salespeople are managed salespeople.
Mm.
And most owners of MSPs don't want to manage salespeople. They're trying to
Yeah.
get rid of that whole thing. And so those kind of things I think are critical to really breaking through that. And that's the first plateau that I see in most MSPs is 750,000 to $1 million of revenue, and they're stuck
Yeah.
because they don't want to put the effort into selling beyond that.
Mm. Is there one essence, I guess might be the word that I'd use for it, that MSPs that do break through and still embrace owner-led sales up to whatever the next plateau is there an essence to the mindset that they do adopt or did adopt that either empowered them or enabled them to really make that shift to sales first, growth first?
I think it's a discipline, Jeffrey,
Mm,
more than anything. It's being willing to block your calendar out for a half a day to go out and sell.
yeah.
Not well, if the phone rings, then I'll talk to somebody, or if I'm walking into Casey's and I see somebody, I'll ask them if I can sell them something.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's the people that are disciplined. They put it on their calendar. They begin to use their PSA tool to actually manage what they're doing in terms of interactions
Yeah.
and creating follow-ups, and it's that discipline I
Mm.
think that's really the key to breaking through.
Yeah, I can see that where it's what you're really talking about is creating the space for the right inputs to then dictate the outputs that will come from it. And
Sales
that,
is not magic; it's a math game, right?
right.
And
Yeah.
so it's not a matter of finesse or anything else. It's a matter of if I'm going to sell X, I've got to talk to this many people
Mm-hmm.
and generate the interest so that I can actually sell something. And so sales is a math game that you just have to be disciplined to operate with. The
Yeah.
reason most MSP owners have a business that they own is they want to be their own boss, which
Mm.
is a great way to live. I love that. But when you're your own boss, you do what you want to do, not what you need to do.
Yeah.
And they typically don't want to do sales. So that's the thing they push off to the side until they have time, which
Mm-hmm.
they will never have time for unless they put it on their calendar and make it real.
Yeah. Awesome. So true. Arlen, one of the things that you have said in the past is that hard work doesn't equal value. And I want to go there for a minute. What's the most dangerous lie that you see owners believing about profit in their business?
Well, I think that our industry is now matured enough that we're starting to see a lot of people that are getting in their 50s and 60s and are at a point where they're trying to move on to the next thing in life.
Mm-hmm.
And they've had this concept that if I just get up every morning, go to work hard, take care of customers, it's all going to work out someday. There'll be a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and I'll be able to retire and move on to whatever I want to do.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is, nobody buys hard work. You got to have hard work if you're going to create value, but it's not a given.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got to understand what it is that really people value in a business in terms of what matters. And there's really a couple of things in today's market that drive value. First one is profitability or EBITDA. I mean, nobody wants to buy a business that isn't generating revenue. That's how they pay for buying the business. It's
Yeah.
gotta produce.
Mm-hmm.
And I see so many MSPs that run a company, and I was guilty of this myself.
Mm-hmm.
I made enough money to pay the bills, but I really wasn't creating value. And
Mm.
so you've got to run a profitable business. You've got to have EBITDA, and that's the number one driver of the valuation of a company. Second is the ability to grow. Organic growth is what most buyers are looking for. Is if I buy your company today and it's at X, well, I don't want it to stay at X. That's why I'm
Yeah.
buying it. I want to take it to Y, which
Mm-hmm.
means we've got to grow.
Yeah.
And so many MSPs don't really know how to grow. A lot of it related to the fact they don't want to embrace the sales engine in their company. But those two factors are really the drivers of valuation today, and for the most part. And service leadership, who benchmarks MSPs across around the globe, last quarter, 18% of the MSPs that were benchmarked lost money.
Mm.
Okay. Now, the folks that benchmark are not the average run-of-the-mill MSP. They are, more disciplined, more mature than most. So the number actually across the MSP channel is higher than that.
Mm.
I can tell you that multiplying a negative profitability by any number turns
Yeah.
out bad.
Mm-hmm.
So those folks really do not have, at this point, a future that they can depend on at all. And believing that hard work they've been doing all these years is got no value to a buyer.
Sure.
So, the reality is our industry does not know how to really run a profitable business. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that is just because of the mindset of the owners.
Yeah.
They're technically focused. They love tools. They love all these cool things that make technology work, which is important. Obviously, that's what customers pay us for. But we got to do it at a profit if we
Mm-hmm.
want to have any kind of future in terms of selling a company and down the road. And that's really, one of the crusades that I'm on. It's what
Mm-hmm.
keeps me awake at night, knowing that we got a lot of people in this channel that are working their butts off trying to be successful. They're able to pay the bills. They can feed their family, put their kids through school. But when it gets to the point where they need to step away and move on to the next chapter, they're getting surprised when they
Yeah.
go to market because they haven't realized what it is that somebody else is going to be willing to pay for. And that's the thing that I think is our biggest problem in the MSP industry today is lack of profitability for the majority of companies. The top quartile does really well. They're averaging about 18% profitability, which is not stellar awesome, but it's
Yeah.
certainly better than zero.
Mm-hmm.
And they're able to drive a good return from their business, but there's the bottom, which is really in bad shape, and then a lot of the middle is not really stellar either. So we got a lot of work to do. And everybody thinks, well, we'll just raise prices. Well, that's one positive thing to do because a lot of MSPs, they don't want to have that conversation.
Yeah.
It's that whole sales thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you got to have that conversation if you want to keep up with inflation and all the other factors that are going on around us every day.
Yeah.
I've talked to MSPs that haven't raised prices in 5 years. That may be good. The customer may love that, but it's
Mm-hmm.
not good for your bottom line and certainly not good for a business valuation perspective.
Yeah.
Buyers want to see disciplined. Hey, we raised our price 3 to 5% this year, or whatever, and every
Mm-hmm.
year we're keeping up with inflation. Because if you don't, your profitability just keeps dwindling away every year. So there's a lot of disciplines around how we run a company that we need to focus on, and that's where peer groups are so important because you have accountability to a peer,
Mm.
and you need that as a business owner that you're not just out there making things up on your own and hoping it all works out in the end.
Yeah. Can you think back to the moment, going back to when you were operating your MSP, and maybe it was even in the time frame where you were hitting that plateau, but the moment where what I hear you talking about it ultimately is like you didn't know your number, or maybe you did, but you didn't know how to surpass it. But specifically around those that probably don't know their number, like either the moment that shifted and or how to work through identifying what your number is and optimizing towards it and for it.
Yeah, well, I can sure tell you when it became real for me. It was when we were in this plateau period, and my solution to fixing the plateau was going to be to do acquisitions. Um, and this was back in 2001, before acquisitions was the thing. And I went to the bank and said, I've identified a company I'd like to acquire. I'm going to need a loan to be able to do that. And they went through their normal due diligence and asked for 3 years of tax returns and all these things to see if I was qualified. And they called me back in and said, we're denying your request for a loan. And I said, well, what's that about? I've been running this business since '85, so I've got a 16-year track record of paying my bills and keeping up. And they said, well, your tax return doesn't really show any profitability at all. When we look at your tax return, and this is a farmer mindset, right? Farmers think this way all the time. How close to zero can we get?
Yeah.
Because they don't like to pay tax. And I that's how I ran my MSP for the first 16 years until I got this rude awakening that you're not going to borrow any money when you have a zero return on your income tax. So I had to change my mindset. And, probably the thing my CPA told me that was most impactful, he said, was only people that make money have to pay tax. Quit complaining and write the check. And that was a huge lesson for me was, you got to run a profitable business if you want to grow. You can creep along organically, doing it yourself. But if you want to grow, you've got to have a plan. You've got to invest in the right things, have the right people around you. But you got to have that right mindset, which is profit is not a bad thing. It's why people run businesses. You shouldn't feel guilty about it. A lot of MSPs feel guilty. I'm taking money from my customer. Yes, you are, but you're delivering value to your customer. Yeah. And that's what you have to focus on is what's the value that you're delivering, and you need to be paid appropriately for that.
Yeah. One of the ways I'm trying to encapsulate this like before and after mindset based off of the things that I'm hearing you say is that kind of like the old mindset that we have to just shatter and walk away from is we tend to put on this like badge of honor or pride or whatever it happens to be. Maybe it's just ego where like you can outwork your team, you can out hustle the pain. And yet if your P&L is still a mess, then you're really you're not building something, you're just bleeding with the business is kind of like my capstone to where we've gone so far.
I think that's a great analysis.
That really transitions then into this other thing that you're well known for saying, and it probably has been skywritten above you at a speech sometime, but that hope is not a plan, right? It's more of a mantra of anything. And what I kind of wanted to sit on or anchor into a little bit there is, what happens to that MSP owner that confuses vision for avoidance?
The reality is that we've got to take vision and make it real. And, vision without execution is hallucination. That's what Thomas Edison said. And I see a lot of MSPs that are hallucinating a lot. They have some idea, but it's not really defined. And, going back to how do you figure out what that valuation needs to be? Well, the financial advisors that we've talked to say that, if you take what your annual spend is, okay, and let's, for example, say it's $100,000 a year is what it costs my family to live.
Mm-hmm.
You need to multiply that times 25 on the low end to 40 on the high end. So let's say you're live a frugal life. So we'll use 25 as the number. 2.5 million should be your target that you're shooting to create in terms of value for personal wealth when you move on to the next chapter and are no longer getting a paycheck. And so anchoring on having that number, and you don't set it once and that's what it is forever. You got to every year think about it and move it around based on what's going on.
Yeah.
But at least you have a target, right? And you've got to take that vision and turn it into something real like that, so you know exactly what it is you're chasing, and then create a plan for how you're going to get there. The problem I see all the time, Jeffrey, is that people they'll call me up and say, I want to sell. I'm tired. I'm worn out. I'm done with this business.
Yeah.
And let's figure out how much it's worth, and I want to find a way to sell it. Well, they typically can't get anywhere close to the number they have, right? So I need 2.5 million, and my net worth today is $500,000, and the business is going to be worth $1 million maybe. So I still got this gap. And without a plan, that gap just keeps getting kicked down the road. So you've got to focus on the end game and know what that end game is, and then the target of how you're going to get there, so that you can accomplish what it is. The people that have that discipline, I'm seeing fantastic exits. They're actually doing better than they expect because they had a plan and they just marched toward it consistently. But when you call up and say, I'm ready to sell today, and you haven't had a plan, that's typically a bad combination. You're not going to get there. And then the question is, well, how many more years do you think I have to do this if I'm going to get to my number? And, the answer is, if you keep doing what you've been doing, you're never going to get to your number.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to make some changes and really focus. I see owners that come in and find out that they can't get there today, that will then focus on driving their profitability and growing their company, that 3 years later go to market and have a fantastic exit. And I talked to a partner just in the last couple of weeks from the East Coast, and he has a health issue that has come up, and he needs to sell his company. And I said, let's look at your financials. It was a very dim looking set of books, and he basically gave his company away. Nobody would buy it. And he said, I worked on this for 27 years, and now I'm just basically going to have to walk away from it. Well, if you don't have a plan, that happens, unfortunately. And so, I tell people all the time, if you want to have a good transition, you've got to start today with a plan. Even if you think you're 25 years away, start today. The bites you have to take to get there are much smaller now than if you wait till you're within 5 years, and then you have to take these big bites to be able to get there.
Yeah. What is the most honest conversation you've ever had to have with someone about, someone who's waited too long about that with their plan?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I have a lot of these conversations. And the hardest ones are the ones where health is involved, right? And the hand they had planned to play, they're not getting to play because health is moving them faster. I mean, the worst ones are the ones where there's a death involved, right? I've had multiple partners that have passed away unexpectedly, and the wake of that for their family and for their employees has been devastating. But there's just so many partners that think it's all going to work out because they've been working hard all these years, and somebody's going to see value in that, and that's just not true. Far too often I have to tell them, your baby's ugly. Nobody really wants to buy an ugly baby. So let's get to work. And the real challenge, the factor that people don't seem to connect in their mind is that time is really one of the key elements of
Mm,
successful transition. They wait too long. They have unrealistic expectations,
yeah.
and you just can't fix things overnight. You can't
Mm,
really. I tell people you need 5 years. If you give me 5 years to help kind of shape what you're doing and put you in a peer group and let peers help you be accountable, you can have a great exit. You
mm-hmm.
give me 3 years, maybe. Unfortunately, most of the calls that I get are, "Hey, I want out this year."
Yeah.
It's six to
Mm,
12 months, and there's not much you can do in 6 to 12 months to really change the trajectory of a business.
yeah. And time is such an interesting perspective driven thing too, right? Like even anyone listening right now, and I'll do it as well. If I think about 5 years in the present moment, it seems like so long. But if you hit rewind a little bit and just think back to 5 years ago, think how quickly it went, right? So
Absolutely.
perspective is the thing that really trips us up most of the time. Three things that I've heard really coming out in most of the context that you've provided, which I really just want to lean back and reiterate because I've heard it so much, but I want to make sure anyone else picks it up if they missed it, is that time is your greatest ally. It's also the one thing that is universal to us all, right? So we need to change our relationship with it and learn to leverage it versus being owned by it. The second one is discipline is a key component of everything you've said so far, which is really about clarity, focus, and execution, maybe is how I'd bundle up the discipline component, uh, the planning, right? So like the vision piece,
Yep.
and then execution being the last piece, right? And not even just execution, but the way we would speak is like you can't be allergic to the hard work. Like it
Right.
will take hard work. One of the aha moments for me around that later on in my career was when I read The Hard Thing About Hard Things from Ben Horowitz. And he described a point in his career where he had an advisor that told him there was no such thing as silver bullets, only lead bullets, and that you have to be willing to spend those or expend those. And that was really kind of a reframe for me too, where I think the trap that so much of our time gets caught up in is seeking the silver bullet
Mm.
versus applying the lead bullets with discipline over time to get to that predetermined outcome or better. That is the piece that we miss. It's almost like the fallacy or the flaw in the false beliefs we carry until it ends up in I have 8 months to get out, Arlen, help me
Right.
out, what do I do?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and
Interesting.
I think the key across all three of those things, Jeffrey, is accountability.
Mm,
Now that is the missing link for so many owners of
yeah.
businesses, is that they're just not accountable. And
Hmm.
we can find excuses every day
Sure.
for how we waste our time or how we don't discipline ourselves, or
Mm-hmm.
execute what we know we need to do. There's
Yeah.
always an excuse, and if there's nobody there that can at least provide some checks and balances and question our
Mm-hmm.
choices, we'll just continue to slip and not do the things that really matter. And so, that's where I really learned the power of peer groups,
Hmm.
but even empowering your teams to ask those questions.
Yeah.
That was always one of the things that I did with my team. Was I shared our plan, my personal life plan, with my team, and said, if you see me deviate off of this,
Hmm.
I want you to feel empowered to say, what are you doing?
Yeah.
What are you wasting your time chasing this when you've identified these things are the important things? And they did, and
Mm-hmm.
they got great joy out of it sometimes. But I needed that. I needed somebody to really help me stay focused on what
Yeah.
matters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I'm going to go back to that kind of like before and after moment for you again earlier on, where one of the other things that you have said, which really kind of hit me like a truck, was that someone's going to have to clean up your mess, right? So we're talking about that like before moment where things were messy. You don't know your numbers. You're just kind of existing or whatever, being driven by the business.
Yep.
Maybe again, like a perspective reshape if we look at it through your lens, because I'm sure you've reflected on this too, in that world where someone was going to have to clean up your mess, then who almost would have had to clean up yours had you not, evolved through it or gone past it?
Well, I mean, the reality was that I was close to a financial, meltdown. Actually, right ahead of this, in the late '90s,
Mm-hmm.
I bought into the Y2K greatest event in the history of technology mindset.
Okay.
Um, and being the genius I was, I hired 13 engineers the last half of '99 because we were going to have all this work to do.
Mm-hmm.
So we went from 25 folks up to 38 folks in the last quarter of '99. Well, Y2K came and Y2K went, and there was no work. And by April of 2000, we were bleeding cash badly. And it was the one time in my career that I had to really face the potential of layoffs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the peer groups came from. One we had at our leadership team meeting in April. One of the guys said, we can't be that stupid. There's got to be something going on here that we're not seeing. So let's just
Mm-hmm.
call a couple other companies and ask if we can meet and sit down and talk about what's going on with Y2K. And so we did. We called 3 other Iowa companies that we were familiar with and said, hey, can we get together and just compare notes? And they all agreed. We met, spent the day together in Des Moines and talked about what they were seeing in their markets. And they didn't have any business either from Y2K.
Mm-hmm.
So that just galvanized the fact that we had to do a layoff.
Sure.
We could not continue to bleed the way we were. And so, that's what we did. We went back, we had to lay off folks, right size down to 25 where we were before.
Mm-hmm.
And that was all part of this bank thing when I was trying to get a loan at the same
Sure.
time, which was a bad combination of events, to say the
Mm-hmm.
least. But, those kind of things really, had I not had, a teammate that was willing to say, hey, we need to listen to some other people, not just what you think.
Yeah.
And then we went and did that and found people that were willing. And, those things could have easily, I could have resisted that and said, I'm not going to do a layoff. I'm just going to find a way and figure this out, which I wouldn't have been able to do with that much extra help.
Mm.
It could easily bankrupt our company.
Yeah.
So, that would have been a mess. And since part of a family operation, my
Mm-hmm.
brother would have ended up helping to help clean it up, and it would have totally changed the trajectory of life for sure.
Yeah. Maybe digging into that a little bit too, because this is one of the other themes that I know I've taken away from hearing you speak before, and kind of labeled it the invisible toll that all of this takes on you. One of the things you've talked about is that you thought you were managing stress well enough, but it really wasn't until after your exit where your family had told you that you'd changed.
Yep.
What did the stress steal from you that you really only saw after you had let it go?
Well, there's no question that it had impact on my health, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I had a quad bypass in 2005, which a little early. I was not even 50 years old yet. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I, looking back, there's no question that stress was a factor in that.
Yeah.
And even today, I'm dealing with heart challenges that I know are stress related. That while I've sold the business long ago, those things continue
Yeah.
to create issues going forward. So, there's certainly was a health piece of it that impacted me, but relationally,
Mm-hmm.
one of the good things that we did was the office was built on the end of my house, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I grew up on a farm. I live in the house I grew up in, and we've built 5 additions on the south end of our house. And so going to work was walking through a door, right?
Yeah.
And there
Mm-hmm.
was no real separation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I could go home and I still had access to everything like I was at the office because I was home. So, that was part of a choice we made early in our career before we knew what was really going to happen with the business. Nancy wanted me to be close to where the kids were going to be, and not be in town in an office, and because she knew I was tended to be a workaholic, so
Yeah.
like most owners.
Yep.
And so she said, we'll see more of you if you're here, and the kids can come down to your office and be around you. And so they grew up in the middle of a technology company,
Mm-hmm.
which had its benefits and it had its challenges.
Right.
But that stress was part of it as well on our relationship and on our family. So
Mm-hmm.
it had a lot of different tentacles that it carried with it, but there was a
Mm-hmm.
lot of goodness too. The kids being entrepreneurs that they were. Lori sold snacks to the employees. She ran the refrigerator and
Mm-hmm.
sold snacks. Pete decided he was going to sell baseball cards. That was going to be his approach to making money. And so
Yeah.
he'd walk around to all the employees with his little baseball card tray, and they'd humor him and buy a few baseball cards. But
Mm-hmm.
so it had positives with it, but there's no question that it did impact my health, my attitude, and all those things. And that weight got lifted, in
Yeah.
2012 when we exited the IT company,
Right.
MSP, and just had we kept our ag tech company, and then we had the peer groups. And so
Yeah.
the stress was a lot less and a lot different.
Sure. Arlen, if you were coaching that 2011 version of you, the one that was still grinding and carrying all that weight, what would you say to break through that denial or that awareness?
Well, number one's easy. Go to the doctor. I
Mm.
mean, most owners that I talk to, they don't have time.
Yeah.
Unless I'm dying, I'm not going to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Medical professionals are there for a reason, and we need to leverage them. And that includes our mental health. The reality is that we need to be willing to accept the fact that we all need help, whether
Mm.
it's physical help or mental health or whatever.
Yeah.
We all need to use professionals to help us.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was in denial, right? And it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
until I had this heart thing really smack me upside the head that I
Yeah.
began to understand that you got to take care of yourself. You're no good to anybody if you're not taking care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So it starts there, and then I think you've talked about discipline and the importance of we got to have a reasonable schedule, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's for most of us going to depend on somebody besides us helping us with that, because our tendency, if we have a choice between work and something else, we're going to do the work part first because we can
Mm.
always justify why we need to do
Yeah.
that,
Right.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
the statement I hear over and over, and I made it, I'm sure 1,000 times. Well, I'm doing it for you. I'm doing it
Mm.
for the family. I'm giving up this birthday party or going to that baseball game or celebrating this holiday because a customer's got an issue, but I'm doing it for you. The reality
Mm.
is we're doing it for ourselves,
Yeah.
right? We
Mm-hmm.
like that hero mentality. We like to feel like we're really making a difference, but we ignore the fact that we're not making a difference with our family. And so we've got to prioritize, which is where plans come in, Jeffrey. And
Mm-hmm.
a life plan and a legacy plan. The real value to those things, if we do them right, is they
Mm-hmm.
give us a reason to say no.
Yeah.
We have to learn to say no to things. And
Mm-hmm.
as owners, our mindset is, well, we're going to say yes to everything. Every opportunity is a great opportunity. It's
Mm-hmm.
not. There are a
Yeah.
lot of opportunities that are not good at all, but they make us feel like we're doing, something of value. So
Mm.
it's really, making that decision to take care of ourselves, having accountability to actually execute that, and doing the things that matter. And
Right.
the only way I have figured out to do that myself is to have a plan where I can look at that and make sure I'm tracking, but give people the right to call me out hold me accountable to it.
Yeah.
Because left to my own ways, I'll piddle away time, or I'll ignore doing what I need to do. Sometimes I just need accountability.
Yeah. The clarity that will give you too, right? I mean, thinking through and feeling through what you've described in this kind of last segment is, even if you sort of make that mindset shift and you overcome the you can't grow ceiling or whatnot, and we then acknowledge that you can actually build an empire, but if your body, if your marriage, if your relationships, if your joy get left behind in that process, then what you're
Why?
really building is a coffin and not a company.
Right.
It's like the result.
Right.
Okay. As we think through now, kind of transitioning a little bit further beyond, right, the exit and the component of, waving the magic pen, essentially, walk me through, in the audience, really, the experience of what happens when everything, everything that you built gets signed away in a single document.
Well, it's very emotional, right? I think that's one of the things that people don't realize is going to happen at some kind of transition. Is it's an emotional event, and what really causes a lot of problems is when emotion gets in the middle of an event and derails both sides of the table. You've got to find ways to control emotion, take emotion out of the process. But one of the learnings that I've had recently, we have a set of peer groups called S to S, which is about success to significance, and that transition of, we spend our careers chasing success, and a lot of people are having success and they're having a great transition. They get to the other side and they realize that, well, my inbox is not full anymore. My phone's not ringing. I'm not hanging around the people that I've been around for the last 25 or 30 years. I don't know what to do with myself. So the response that almost everybody gives me is, I'm going to watch Netflix, binge on Netflix. I'm going to play golf, and I'm going to travel. That's the three things that people say.
Yeah.
About 60 days later, they come back and say, I did those three things. That's not fulfilling. So what now? And, what has happened is that identity and purpose got so entwined with the business that when that's ripped away, people are lost.
Yeah.
I mean, and people that you would expect would be full of joy and happiness are miserable. And so, that's what we really are focusing on with SDS is how do we help you find your new identity, define what your new purpose is, because we all need purpose. That's what gets us up in the morning. That's what gives us joy and really gives us a feeling of worth. And so without that, people are really miserable. And, I've had multiple conversations with guys that had exits way beyond what they expected, who tell me 6 months later, I've never been more miserable in my life.
Yeah.
I don't know what to do. And so you got to prepare for that, right? That's another one of those reasons why it's not good to call up and say, I want to sell the company tomorrow.
Yeah.
That's a formula for disaster. You got to start ahead of time. You've got to figure out, are there some hobbies that I can create?
Yeah.
Are there people that I need to build relationships with today because I'm going to need those relationships in the future? Where are some nonprofits where I can give back and because that's one of the common things. Everybody wants to give back. They feel blessed, but where are you going to do that? And so preparation for a transition is really, really important to have it not go poorly. And, the other thing that I'm seeing, I've just had a couple of these cases in the last month where marriages have fallen apart after the transition, right?
Yeah.
For 25 or 30 years, they chased and they sacrificed and they worked hard to create a company that they would someday be able to transition. They got the transition done well. They've got money in their bank account like they never expected, but the relationship has fallen apart. And, we talked about that personal wealth target earlier.
Yeah.
I can tell you when you divide the pile of money in half, most people don't have their personal wealth target anymore.
Mm.
So you got to take care of the relationships, and it gets back to that whole conversation we had earlier about
Yeah.
people are what matter.
Mm-hmm.
People are what matter. The
Yeah.
money you get, that's great, but
Mm-hmm.
people are what matter.
Yeah. That's so. The one word I didn't hear you use, but I felt it because it took me 13 out of my 18 years in MSP to figure this out. It took me 11 roles to figure this out. And it took me 7 times at the 5 companies that I worked for, MSPs that I worked for, to figure it out. And that was fulfillment was really the ultimate aspiration, right? I chased so many things without knowing it for so long. At first it was title, and then it was responsibility, and then it was status, and then it was eventually money when I flipped over to the sales side, right? And realized
Yeah.
the different economies existed. And then the money wasn't there either. Not, well, the money was there, but the money wasn't the thing that I was chasing. And it kind of went back through that title, identity, status without realizing that's what it was. And it took me, like I said, 13 of those years or so to finally realize two decisions, two forks in the road when I was making those decisions. One, am I moving towards something or away from something?
Yep.
Realize that those 11 different role transitions were all to move away from the thing that I just wanted to avoid or get away from, because I wasn't actively moving toward the thing that truly lit me up. And then the second part, second kind of fork was, I guess there hasn't been a difference ever since, but it was once I understood how I'm wired, where my magic is, where I am greatest, where I'm most fulfilled, is that like fulfillment was the lens I had to start making decisions through. Because if I pursued for fulfillment, then my experience along the way was filled with all those things we talked about being absent before, right?
Yeah.
I have the joy. I can take care of my health. I choose then to focus on the relationships and the people that I have along the way. But man, did I squander that and screw it up for so long before I was fortunate enough to figure that out in my, whatever that would have been, mid 30s or so. And I can't even think of like the light bulb moment that came on other than analytically sitting down one day and realizing, why is it that within 6 months after making the transition toward the thing I thought I wanted, did the light bulb go off and say, well, it's because I was never moving toward what I wanted. I was moving away from the existence that I was in that moment, which made me really do the soul searching to figure out fulfillment was the thing along the way.
Well, certainly one of the lessons that I learned was had to do with my faith and how important that was to keep that grounded.
Mm-hmm.
In the 90s, when I was going through all this turmoil, I bought into the whole idea that you can't have faith and be successful in the workplace. And so, I bought into that lie. And when I walked through the door to my office, I checked my faith at the door and said, I'll pick it up when I go back the other way tonight to go home.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after a while, I quit picking it up, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I lost that footing in my life, and that was a big reality that helped as all this kind of came together in 2001. That it is part of who I am, and it's not a limiting factor to success at all. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, it's core to success because it's the foundation. It's the rock that doesn't move. It's the one thing I could depend on. And so, that was all part of the process that helped me get back on track and work through the challenges and
Mm-hmm.
really move in a positive direction toward creating the company that we wanted to build. So, I think we all need to figure out where those foundations are, because we're going to have rocky times. We're going to struggle with challenges, but we need to know where the footing is that we can depend on and hold tight to. And for me, that was a big aha that I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah. How did you detach your self-worth from the business, and how long did that actually take, kind of in that transition before you'd figured that part out?
Well, I mean, I wasn't going from something. I was going to
Mm.
something,
Yeah. Okay.
and so that
Yep.
was that was a positive thing for me.
Hmm.
I loved the peer group stuff more than the MSP stuff
Yeah.
at the end, and
Hmm.
so you know it was a positive thing for me to be able to transition the MSP to someone else and be able to put all my time on the peer groups
Hmm.
side of the ledger. So that was a very a good thing that happened in my transition. I didn't
Sure.
have to look for what was next. I already had the what's next in place, and
Hmm.
so. But
Yeah.
you're right. Running away from something that seldom leads to really what you want to have as the next thing.
Hmm.
It's when you run to something that really is what you want to set yourself up for, and that's why it's important that you think about that stuff before you get to transition,
Yeah.
rather than reacting to it later.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot easier to cope with that as an employee or an entrepreneur inside other people's businesses than being the entrepreneur and not having the time as an example. Um, what did you have to bury inside yourself to unlock the next version of your purpose as you've been able to do that through a couple of those transitions?
Well, I think yeah, I had to get over myself, right?
Hmm.
Um, and that took a lot of reflecting and working through some of the purpose exercises that help you really reflect on what are your core skills, what are your core values, what are the
Hmm.
things that really matter and make you unique as an individual. You when you're in the trenches every day, just working your tail off, I don't spend much time reflecting like I
Yeah.
need to, and that's
Mm.
where we learn. That's where we learn the most is when we just stop and look back
Yeah.
and realize what those lessons are that we should be learning and make sure that we apply those things.
Hmm.
Um, so there was even with the fact that I was moving to the peer groups
Hmm.
as my transition. The people that I was working with were not the same anymore because we had about 60 employees that went with the MSP business when we sold it. So no longer was I rubbing shoulders with those folks on a regular basis.
Yeah.
The good news was I kept about 30 people from the ag tech and peer group side. So it wasn't like I was out on an island.
Hmm.
It was a different kind of environment with the people that were around me. Um, but I had to be intentional about really thinking through how to stay connected to folks. That's one of the common things I
Mm.
hear is, "Well, I've lost all my relationships." Well, you really haven't. You've lost the fact you're with them. You were with them every day, but
Yeah.
they still have a phone, they still have text, they still have email. And
Hmm.
we got to. It's mind shift stuff, right?
Sure. Yep.
I want to keep a relationship, so I got to work at it a little harder, maybe, or I've
Mm.
got to do it a little differently. Doesn't mean it's gone. It just means we have to really put effort into it,
Yeah.
which is why planning is so important. You can
Hmm.
be intentional about how to create a plan where, hey, Joe's a great friend. I want to keep that relationship, so I'm going to put it on my calendar to check in with him every 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
We can intentionally do the things that can really help us maintain the goodness of where we came from and
Hmm.
carry that with us into the new world that we're going to be living in.
Yeah. Something again, I don't want the audience to lose sight of as they follow through our conversation because it's such a critical, almost side comment that you made, and that is the power of reflection. And one of the things I've been trying to do, even while you're laying such experience down for me and for whoever's listening, is reflect on what you're saying to truly hear it, um, and even be able to repeat it back. And kind of the overarching thing that I'm hearing and feeling and reflecting on from this conversation ultimately is that, like, revenue can fade, roles can fade, titles can fade, even the company that you're in or whatnot can fade, but it is how you show up for others is what truly echoes and continues.
Yeah. It's people, it's relationships. That's what matters. And I've had the opportunity and the privilege to spend time with folks, at the end of their life.
Mm-hmm.
I've never once had somebody say, "I wish I would have spent more time working.
Yeah.
I wish I would have made more money. I wish I would have, took a boat around the world." They don't say
Yeah.
that. What they always say is, "I wish I would have spent more time with family. I
Yeah.
wish I would have spent more time with the people that I care about." And that's really, I think, the essence of why people run a business or lead companies is they're in their mind, they're setting themselves up to be able to have that kind of relationship,
Yeah.
but they don't invest the time to create those kind of things. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why legacy planning is so important, Jeffrey, is we have to reflect on what do we want that legacy to look like.
Right.
When I'm 80 years old, sitting on a rocking chair on the porch, what do I
Mm-hmm.
want my grandkids and great grandkids to say about me?
Yeah.
And if we haven't done the work and spent the time and created the relationship, we shouldn't be surprised when they don't even slow down and recognize we're sitting there, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We have to be intentional about how we build those relationships and the investments we make.
Mm.
And while running a business and being profitable and all that's important, we got to live.
Yeah.
That's not really what we're going to care about in the
Mm-hmm.
end. And that's why planning is so important. Is if we aren't intentional about thinking about those things and putting in place the disciplines we need to get there,
Yeah.
we're going to wake up someday and say, "Wow, I worked hard for 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a bank account with money in it, but I got nobody around me to share it with."
Yeah. That is, there's so much power in that, right? And the one word, and I'm going to echo it for them in case, again, they didn't pick up on it, was, intentionality is the big thing. Planning is big because then you have clarity on what it is that you're being intentional about. And the thing that I really feel or felt when you were talking through being intentional and working toward that is through the lens of intentionality, there is the power of being present
Mm-hmm.
because you're far more conscious and you're far more aware and you're far more, maybe it's just those two things about where you're going, why you're going to go there, who's going to be there with you when you get there, what it's going to look like when you arrive. Even though it forces us to do what perhaps we're weakest at, which is slow down enough to really do the deep thinking work before we move to the doing work, so that we understand where every brick that we're laying every single day, like the road actually led to where we wanted it to be, the ideal outcome, versus, back to our keyboard where we're slouched over it or something along those lines.
Yep, absolutely true.
Yeah. Awesome. Arlin, man, I appreciate all of the wisdom that you've shared here today, and even on the personal side, right? It wasn't so much just looking at like the business lessons, but really untapping like the how and the where and the what it came from through your own personal journey. I think it resonates so much more, certainly with me, hopefully with the audience as well, when they can see themselves in your shoes in those same moments. And ideally, what they can look at, what they can see, and hopefully what they can feel when they listen to your story is, a lot of times I framed my questions around the before and the after. Um, while we put the emphasis on the before, it's because we want to see people get to the after, right? And that there
Yep.
is an after, and almost giving themselves permission to get to the after that they want rather than the after they're going to get. Um, the one thing I want to ensure that we do, because we do it towards the end of every episode, is if you could leave one question behind for the next guest that they have to answer, what would that question be?
Well, the question I would ask is, if you knew that you had 1 year left in your life, what would you stop doing that you're doing today so that you could be intentional about creating the legacy you want to leave behind.
What a beautiful question. And
there's a lot of things we do every day that if we reflect and look back in the future, we're going to say, that didn't really matter. It took a lot of time. We spent a lot of effort. It didn't really matter. I wish I would have done this instead.
Yeah.
And we have the opportunity. That's the beauty of this, is we can make those choices, and we can do it today. And that's my encouragement, is do the things that matter.
Yeah. And you may not gain the awareness of what truly matters if you don't flex with discipline, create the time and the space to sit, to reflect, and to hold ourselves accountable ultimately, right? To even that one exercise. If we can't hold ourselves accountable to anything else, if we could hold ourselves accountable to answer that one question honestly, even if it hurts and it's uncomfortable and you don't want anyone to see what you wrote down on paper,
right?
Just start there and work through it there.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Arlin, if people want more of you, where are some of the places they can go to get more of you, follow you?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook, obviously, as options. I write a daily email blog post that goes out 6 days a week. My daughter writes on Saturday, but I write the other 5 days. And it's just a compilation of reflection on what happened the day before, basically, my thoughts on scripture that I study each day, and something I share from somebody else that I think might be helpful. And so they can subscribe to that, and you can put that in your notes on your show.
Yeah.
And so lots of ways, I'm at all the industry events, so related to ConnectWise. So love to meet people there and shake hands and learn what's going on in their lives. So lots of different ways we can connect.
Awesome. And you're not hard to miss at events these days either, wearing the Lego outfit.
Lego outfit, yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely a pattern interrupt. So stop and talk with the Legos. And for those listening that aren't watching or don't have the show notes right in front of you, the daily newsletter that goes out is called Thoughts from the Farm, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Awesome. Again, thank you very much, Arlin, for coming on the show. And thank you to the audience for listening through. And I encourage everyone, this is going to be one of those that you're going to want to replay and go back and listen to again, and listen to and through what Arlin was sharing with you, and really understand the heart that it comes from, and how you can have control over what after looks like for you.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's been a great honor to be with you.